For the last 2 days, I've literally just been, well, hiding in my hideout. I've spent millions of gold, dozens of divines, got a lot of advice from you guys, and ultimately I landed on this. A 500 Demon Flame stacked 9,000% spell damage boss melter. Now I say boss melter on purpose. She's a 10 out of 10 on bossing and her mapping's about a 6 out of 10. This much damage came at a cost, and that was survivability. If you're not a fan of Glass Cannon, don't worry. Like I said, millions of gold and dozens of divines. I also made this version. Basically, this version should be tankier, and if you wanted to get even more survivability, you actually have the options to do so. The Glass Cannon version is pretty strict on what she's doing. Now I'm gonna be honest, as much as I want to talk about Dami Mommy and weird step on me jokes, this build is complicated, so I'm probably going to keep that to a minimum. To give you an idea, on December 23rd, I will officially have been playing PoE for 12 years. And this build has one of the weirdest interactions and combinations I have ever seen in that time period. So if you're brand new to PoE, brother, I'm going to do my best to explain this. If you don't know anything about Demon Form, let me catch you up to speed. The two most important things are that you lose 0.5% of your life per second per Demon Flame. This is based off of your maximum HP. Originally, I thought that this did not count reserved life. I was wrong. Take your maximum life and add your reserved life, and that is how much maximum HP you have. Thanks to some help from you guys, we know that the lowest HP you want is 200. You do not need to go below 200 total maximum HP. You will not receive any more benefits. The game will always round to 1 damage no matter how low your maximum HP is. Here are all the items on screen that reduce your maximum HP that I would advise that you use. The most important one is going to be the Ghost Wraith. The most common version is also going to be Ghost Wraith 2 Ming's Hearts, but you can definitely take off at least 1 Ming's Heart and put in one of the 2 amulets. After that, you get as much base life regen you can on all the pieces of gear, and there you go. That's how you run the classic version of Demon Form. Now, you're going to learn about the other version. So, first things first, we need to talk about Mask of the Stitch Demon and its interaction with Ghost Wraith. Alright, there's too many words and it's way too complicated, so we're just going to visually just show you what happens. Currently, I am wearing my life regen helmet from my alternative version. If I take a Mask of the Stitch Demon on, look at what happens to my life per second. It goes to 1,632. And if I take my corrupted version that I made myself, a lot of people were asking about this, just vol it and hope you get lucky. We go from 1,632 to 2,077. Now here's the downside. Mask of the Stitch Demon makes it so we have 0 energy shield, which means we have 356 life. Obviously, we can't live with this. So what happens if we go convert our energy shield to mana? Okay, now we have 2,500 mana. Now we go mind over matter, and now our mana is our health pool. So combined, we have 2,900 HP total. But here's the thing, technically speaking, we should have 0 energy shield. That's why it says 0, because Mask of the Stitch Demon says 0. And this is where Ghost Wraith comes in. Because Ghost Wraith converts your life to ES, and it turns out that this ES number cannot be converted, which means we retain our life regen, and we go down to 1,119 life regen. If we take this off, we go down to our 293 like we had before. Ghost Wraith overrides Mask of the Stitch Demon, and we get a lot of life regen. That is the summarized version. I'm not going to try to do the math, and I'm not going to try to act like I know the math. That's just how it works. But now you should be able to see why I say we're a Glass Cannon, because we have 2,500 mana total, and I have gotten ES and mana on every piece of gear I can. This is such an abundance of life recovery that I chose to stop at 500 Demon Flare stacks because I didn't think I needed more. You could definitely push to 600, maybe 700. With my current gear, I can easily get to 600. But now you should visually understand why we're squishy. It's because our life pool is just very, very small. Now with this low of HP, I really had to sit here and think, how could I actually survive on this level? With this much damage, the bosses should have never been a problem, so I wasn't worried about that. I was more trying to figure out, how do we survive? So I tapped into my inner PoE 1 hardcore knowledge, and I thought, what is the best defensive mechanic in the game? And the answer is always freeze. This is where Spark and Call of the Brotherhood came in. Spark hits everything on our screen, and it has good coverage. Call of the Brotherhood takes our lightning damage, turns it into cold. If we get a little bit of freeze increase, and we should be able to freeze everything. But you need to understand, any version that you run of Demon Form, in the first about 15 to 20 seconds of the map, you're gonna be weak. That's just how demon form works. I can't fix it. I have some options that help, but at the end of the day, those are just band-aids. That's just the way demon form works. Your reward, on the other hand, is being able to absolutely obliterate bosses when you reach them. Now, because you can use any skills, you don't even have to do what I'm doing. You can literally just try any skill combination. You have 9,000% spell damage. Pretty much everything works. This is just what I landed on because I felt like it gave me the best chance to survive against all content. Now, let's go over the skills, and just between this skill setup, I changed things around so much. So I'm just gonna go over the baseline version, and I'll briefly go over the options you have with just the same setup, not changing anything. Starting off, obviously we have demon form. You link this with second wind. There's literally no reason not to. And as you can see, we brought the boy back. Because we're so squishy, obviously we needed to take the dog. I've linked with just meat shield, minion mastery, and elemental army. You could put in culling if you want, I just don't have it here. And I'm pretty sure last gasp is bait. This is where your guys' advice will come in. I'm pretty sure that if he has 0 HP, he's actually not tanking for us, but I could be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. For now, we'll just leave it here. All right, as you can see in the background, I do have cast on freeze, but as you can see, I can't reserve it because I don't have enough spirit. That's because when I'm mapping, I turn on blasphemy with temporal chains and magnified effect. But when I reach the boss, I turn off blasphemy and I turn on cast on freeze. Long story short, the mana is a bitch and I can't fix it. I have some solutions that you can try out that I tinker with a lot, but for now, let's just go over the basic version. Cast on freeze, comet, energy retention, impetus, spell echo. Comet still does do insane damage, but when mapping, 1, it doesn't feel like it's really that useful because our damage is already good, and 2, our mana is our health, so when this thing procs, sometimes it goes off at least 6 times in a second, and it basically just completely kills you. So for mapping, I run blasphemy, temporal chains, magnified effect. I've also run with enfeeble, as you can see down here, and sometimes I put in hypothermia, but I think I would recommend temporal chains as the best defensive layer. Next we have frostbomb. I have it linked with strip away to make its exposure stronger, and then persistence so it stays around longer. By the time frostbomb disappears, 95% of all bosses are pretty much dead anyway. When you enter a map, flame wall is going to really hard carry you because your damage is so low that the flat damage it adds to your spark is pretty damn useful. Just link this with fortress, that's all you need. And yes, you can see that I do have archmage, but I think it's smarter to explain this later, otherwise it won't make sense. Next up we have Frostwall. Frostwall is an absurd amount of damage, and essentially when a boss spawns, he'll blow it up and instantaneously freeze. That will proc cast on freeze, and I have this linked with Spell Cascade, Arcane Tempo, Control Destruction, and Considered Casting. You can feel free to tinker with the damage supports here. I kind of just move them around. It doesn't really matter. The damage is insane. Now, for Archmage to make sense, you have to understand what I'm running on Spark. My Spark is 1, it's bricked, it's -1 level. I'm stupid for corrupting it, but I was pretty much done with this character anyway. I have it linked with Life Tap, and this is where it's interesting. If you look at this, because our life regen is so absurd, it means that we can essentially have free mana cost until about 450 stacks, and then my life starts to regen and starts to, roller coaster up and down. But until then, 99% of all maps are completed about 350 stacks. So Life Tap is just a free solution for our HP and our mana. But because it is eating into our HP, I do run Inspiration anyway. Acceleration, so for the coverage. Glaciation, so everything is frozen. And Pierce. Yes, our damage is so insane, I literally do not even run a damage support. But you definitely can at the beginning of a map. What sometimes I do is I take out Control Destruction from Frostwall, and I put it here. This pretty much means about 15 to 20 stacks, you're actually able to move through the map and kill mobs and kill some rare mobs. If you go for this version, you need to wait until about 30 stacks before you really start feeling comfortable. So if you don't mind gem swapping, I'd recommend you start the map with Control Destruction. Now because I'm running Life Tap Inspiration, that's what allows me to run Archmage. Archmage does increase the cost of the health I'll be losing, but the damage just so far outweighs the negatives. The downside is it means our cast on freeze gets increased in cost as well, which is why I don't use it when mapping. Archmage is good enough to make the maps feel mostly smooth, and by the time cast on freeze procs, mostly everything is dead anyway, and I'm just pretty much killing myself for no benefit. And that is basically the exact setup I run. I swap cast on freeze and blasphemy when I reach a boss. I just open it, right click it, kill the boss, and then I switch it back. and that's mostly it. Now, there are tons of options, like I said earlier. You can swap so many supports around. For example, sometimes I've tinkered around with putting life tap on our cast on freeze. The problem with this is that our mana pool is just so small, and even though I have so much mana regen, it's just not enough. So ultimately, this is the version I landed on. Feel free to tinker with anything or just use one of the different skill combinations I recommend at the end. Now for the gear, obviously, Mask of the Stitch Demon. I made this one myself. Hopefully the price on these doesn't completely break by the time you watch this, but I can't promise anything. It took me about 10 Mask of the Stitch Demons to finally get one that procced the 0.07. I don't know if that number goes higher. This is just the first one I rolled and I was happy with it. Next, obviously we have the Ghost Wraith. You're going to want to get a high percent maximum life converted. Mine is corrupted 61%. I made it myself, which is why it has the 2 max fire res on it. Long story short, testing sometimes bricks your items and sometimes it doesn't work. So ignore the max fire res. Percent mana is probably the best you can get, maybe flat mana. Now, the amulet. This is really going to be up to you. I have this amulet with that much spirit because I wanted to run Blasphemy because, I mean, we're just so squishy that I wanted any possible layer of defense and I was willing to pay for it. Depending on how you want your mapping to feel with this version, I would recommend that you actually get that much spirit. Spark pretty much one-shots everything in bosses, but every now and then a mob jumps off screen onto you. Well, if you have Temp Chains or Enfeeble, your chance of surviving that is much, much better. But in order to afford Blasphemy, you're going to need a lot of spirit. You see the problem here? Essentially, you just want mana / energy shield. Keep in mind your energy shield and your mana are just health. Just think of those as HP. And even though we do have a ton of life recovery, I would still recommend trying to get a decent life regen roll. You don't need to try to get a perfect tier 1 roll like I have. I would not recommend you wear a Carnage Heart or an Eye of Chayula with this version. You already have enough life recovery. Getting less HP is just not needed at all. You don't need to hit 600, 700 stacks. If you want to, go for it, do you. I'm just saying I wouldn't recommend it, which is also why we're just wearing a fat mana regen ring. Get some life regen on it, quality it up with some flesh catalyst, and that's pretty much the best you can do. Now the boots are interesting. As you can see on them, I do not have move speed. I have a ton of energy shield and a ton of mana. Like I said, I was trying to get as tanky as I possibly could, and the only thing we can do is just try to quote-unquote get health. But not having move speed isn't the worst thing in the world. Anyway, if you look at our dash, we dash the same distance no matter how much move speed we have. What move speed does do though is make the dash quicker. So if you have move speed on your boots, you will dash quicker, but for this particular playstyle, I'm pretty much just casting Spark and then only dashing when I think it's safe. So I didn't really feel like the move speed was really needed. I'd rather at least try to do what I can to get a little tankier. The belt is mana, double res, life regen, and your gloves are the same as the boots. As much mana and as much ES as you can possibly muster. Call of the Brotherhood, I quality it with mana just to try to squeeze out some more mana regen. And obviously this converts our lightning damage to cold damage, which is why we can freeze everything. We're hitting so hard that we can kind of just naturally chill and freeze everything. And then on my skill tree, I got a few freeze nodes just to make it a little bit more consistent. All right, for the ascendancies, I'm going to talk about these in the order I'd recommend you get them, obviously if you're starting this build out. Demonic Possession, obviously no surprise. Then I would say Loyal Hellhound, just to make yourself a little bit tankier. Altered Flesh, only after your fire res and your chaos res is capped. I opted for Badat's Will. This is only because I wanted to tinker around with spirit combinations, running Blasphemy, maybe I can fit in Focus Curse. You do not need this, and technically speaking, this 3% life node is obviously bad, because this is increasing our maximum HP, but for me, it was worth it. Technically speaking, if you wanted to min-max this, you can opt for any of these other versions. Do not take Pyromantic Pact, it does not work with Mind Over Matter. For me, I pretty much just took this 4% life node and the spell damage node, because it would be better than nothing. Now for the skill tree, of course, there's going to be a link in the description with both skill trees. I'm going to have to learn how to use max roll after this. 2 things you need to know about the tree. Everything else is pretty generic. It's mana, some mana regen, some freeze buildup. Here's the big thing. This ES node, yeah, this is your life recovery now. It doesn't actually give you mana, it gives you life recovery. So keep that in mind when you're looking at those. Also, our jewels. Every single one of my jewels has life regen and a res on it. My res is extremely tight. I could have potentially made some more changes. I could have dropped some more jewels if my res wasn't barely capped. If I'm being completely honest, I would probably have dropped some of these jewels and maybe got either more mana regen or try to squeeze something out at the build, but my gear's tight and honestly, I've hit my limit. If you don't know, I call it the PoE ADHD. For the last 6 years, I have not been able to play a build for longer than 3 days. And would you look at the time? It's been 3 days. All right, time to talk about the alternative version. This version is very much closer to the last Hexblast version. You're using Grim Remnants, God, English, to cap off your ES. You throw your Fireball, it blows up the Frost Wall. Frost Wall kills everything around it. That procs Cast on Freeze. The Comet goes down and flies across the screen and blows everything up. Your mana goes to 0, but this isn't mind over matter, so it'll slowly regen up, and you kind of just keep doing this. I capped off this version at about 260 to 280. I could have squeezed up to maybe 300, but I don't see myself getting much further than that. The main item that enables this version is going to be the Blue Flame Bracers. They're very much like the Call of the Brotherhood. They convert our fire damage to cold, and our gloves can't get life regen on them anyway, so it's not that big a deal. For our skills, pretty much everything is mostly the same, but you're going to add Grim Feast in with Clarity. Grim Feast is really what, is going to let you get actually tanky when you're, getting hit by all these mobs. You blow them all up, you pick up all the remnants, and you kind of, keep yourself topped off like this. For Frostwall, you need to put Glaciation here. You could put it on Fireball, but I think Fireball is better suited with Scattershot. Wild Shards, this is what gives you that giant AoE explosion. Unleash is when when you have enough stacks, you pretty much are just like ramping, you charge it up and you throw them all out. You increase your chance of hitting that Wild Shards, and typically when that happens, you don't have to stop and cast again, you can just keep moving. And then obviously, of course, Inspiration, because, well, you've seen my mana, it was going up and down the whole time. Speaking of mana, you can run an infinite quote-unquote alternate version with mana here with Pyromantic Pact, Eternal Youth, and Zealot's Oath. Long story short, your goal is to pretty much cap your fire res to, let's say, 86% at least. Your Pyromantic Pact will detonate, it'll hit your energy shield, but your energy shield is recharging with overflowed life regen, and you can use your life flask to keep your ES topped off. This is kind of what it looks like. I don't hate it, but I didn't love it, and when you're fighting a boss, it really doesn't shine. When you're mapping, it's mostly okay. The biggest problem I have with this one though is that Grim Remnants is not going to be topped off because you're hitting yourself so often consistently. You're really not going to overflow to 10k ES. In the background, I'll show you 2 other skill combinations that I genuinely liked but couldn't figure out how to make it work. One is Ball Lightning and Lightning Warp. For single target, I'd probably use Lightning Conduit, and I was thinking of using a Call of the Brotherhood to convert the lightning damage to cold once again. And you could use Cast on Freeze with Lightning Conduit, and essentially the idea is, you Ball Lightning, teleport to the orb, that puts Shock Ground, Cast on Freeze triggers, activates Lightning Conduit, blows up anything that's around you that survived. At least that's in theory. I couldn't really get it to feel good, and I was running out of money, so I just put that one on the side. I loved how it felt, but I also just didn't know how the hell I would ever survive on it. If I could wear a shield, I probably would have ran this instead. And an honorable mention is Ice Nova. Ice Nova, I didn't play for very long, but with just Cast on Freeze, Comet, and Ice Nova, it was able to pretty much clear maps. It felt good. It actually felt really smooth, the smoothest out of any of them. It had really good FPS. The biggest problem is that Ice Nova's base damage is really bad, and it does more damage based off of things being chilled. Now, Ice Nova can obviously chill/freeze, so your second hit of Ice Nova would do a lot more damage than your first, but the base damage was so low, and if I ever wanted to actually kill things like Arbiter of Ash and stuff, I just didn't see this skill being able to do that. But for mapping, 10 out of 10, butter smooth. And more or less, that's pretty much it. Every other skill is completely fine. I tested Essence Strain, Contagion, pretty much everything was just like, it's like a 7 out of 10. Some felt better, some felt worse. You really can't go wrong. Just pick and choose what you think is the best. All right, that's it for me. A lot of information to digest. Hopefully you can pick up where I left off and actually improve these builds, because it's time for me to move on to my first 0 to hero. Have a good one. I'll catch you later.